Hello, darling magic makers. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me. Today, I want to talk about the inability to visualize things in your head, the inability to hold mental pictures in your mind, okay? There are so many witchcraft techniques in so many books and videos and courses that posit the value of visualization, that tell you to visualize a forest or visualize a scenario or visualize yourself doing something. But there are actually so many sorcerers who don't have mental images. They do not actually have the ability to visualize. They can't think of an apple and then see an apple in their head. And for many, many more practitioners, they do have the ability to visualize, but it's kind of sketchy. It's kind of patchy. It doesn't really stick in their head very long, and they find it hard to maintain. So this video is for everybody in that category, but also for anybody who is interested in learning a little bit more about that particular spectrum of experience, which I think is mightily overlooked by many of the witchcraft resources that we have at our disposal. It's been a little bit of an oversight, and I would like to talk about my experiences of helping witches with no mind's eye, right, that can't actually visualize things in their head, because as a witchcraft mentor, I have come across this, and there have been some things that I've suggested that have helped. So I want to talk about that a little bit today. You know, it's been a video that has been requested actually many, many times over the years. I'm kind of late to the party with it, but I really want to talk about it because it is something that concerns a lot of witches that feel like, oh, well, I can't visualize, so I can't do this exercise in this book, or I can't visualize, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this course that I want to do with this witch, you know? So it's a thing that's happening, and I think we should talk about it and get it out on the table. So let me answer this very important question. What about the witches that can't visualize stuff? So aphantasia is basically the total inability to create mental pictures. In other words, when somebody with aphantasia is talking about something or being spoken to about something, they're not going to be utilizing their imagination in a visual way to refer to whatever is being spoken about, right? They can't do that. If you tell somebody with aphantasia to visualize an apple, they're going to bring to mind all of the data and the detail that they have about apples in their mind. They might bring to mind the experience that they have with eating apples or understanding what apples are, but they're not going to see an apple in their head, right, at any point. Total aphantasia affects a very small amount of the population. I have had a look at some research, but to be honest with you, it seems to vary between 2% and 16%, depending on what I want to trust in terms of studies. But it is a very small slice of the population that have total aphantasia. There are a lot more people who have things like a patchy visual image, right? So they can conjure up an image, but it's going to be glitchy. It's going to be hard to keep hold of. Some people report having quite good visual imaging if they're doing memory recall. So in other words, if it's something that they did or it's somewhere that they went, they have a memory of it, they can recall it quite well. But they struggle when it comes to imagining something brand new, okay? So they can't conjure up something that never happened to them. So there's kind of a range of different people that fall into this category of like not really being a good match for things like visualization techniques. Obviously, like I said at the beginning of the video, there are so many witchcraft techniques that are about like visualize something, hold something in your mind, see yourself walking into the room, see yourself doing something, imagine that something happens to you or whatever. So it can be quite alienating and quite depressing for practitioners that actually do not have this capability. It's just not the way their brain works. It's not that they're broken. It's not that they're inferior practitioners. It's just not the way that their brain works. And so many of the exercises are set up in a way that they would have to customize and tweak and change to make it possible for them to take part in the exercise, which I'm sure probably takes them out of the exercise, if we're being honest, because they have to consciously kind of like reframe the suggestions and the instructions because they can't actually see visual images. I think it's obvious that witchcraft teachers definitely need to be a lot more inclusive with their methods, and a lot more of them probably just need to be aware of aphantasia, you know, be aware that it's a thing, and maybe try to include things that cater to people with no mind's eye, or indeed just cater to people that struggle with their mind's eye in some way, you know. It does seem to be kind of a given that a witch would have a strong mind's eye, but this often isn't the case. When I first qualified as a spiritual counsellor back in 2013, I started taking on clients who wanted to talk to me about their witchcraft practice. And I came across a client very early in my career, and I was talking to them and I said, visualize this thing. And they said, let me stop you right there. I can't do that. No can do. And they told me that they had aphantasia, and I was stunned. I had never heard of this before. Okay, so we're all learning here. We're all learning at different rates about what this is. I immediately began to ask this client loads of questions about the way their brain works when it comes to how they refer to things in their head and how they think of things without having mental imagery. And this set me on a really interesting path of deepening into my exploration of how witchcraft can be viewed through the lens of someone that doesn't have mental imaging. Obviously, I was placed in a situation at that moment where I had to make my teaching accessible, and I had to figure out how this sorcerer's mind worked so we could work together. And it really went on from there. I met people with varying different degrees of mental imaging and various different problems with holding a visualization in their head, etc., etc. So this video is going to give you a few tips and tricks and hints that I have gone over with people and that I've tried to work on with people over numerous years to try and help them with this, if indeed they do want to try and strengthen their mind's eye or just try some different exercises. So I'm going to give you the tips, but at the end, I really want to be clear that I'm not saying that there is anything wrong about you, okay? You are not broken, and it's actually the attitude towards witchcraft and the attitude about what it takes to be a good witch that needs changing, not you, okay? You are rare and special and awesome. So please don't think that if you do not have a visual mind's eye that I'm coming along saying like, oh, we can fix that, honey, because that's not what I'm saying. But I do want to posit to you a few different techniques that I have like devised and tested with people that have actually yielded results for a lot of people. So sit tight, we'll go through the techniques first. I think one of the most important things to remember if you have difficulty with your mind's eye is that you do not need to see something to feel it, right? So let's say that there's a visualization exercise and it's all about imagining yourself on a beach. You do not need to see the beach to feel that you are on the beach. You can recall the five senses. You can know what it's like to smell the sea salt in the air. You can remember what it is like in your body to feel the shock of cold when you run into the waves. You know, you can feel what it was like to have sand between your fingers. You do not need to see it to be able to actually grasp the sensations of the five senses that would put you on that beach. You can feel the wind in your hair. You can smell the sun cream, you know, those things. One thing I realized about working with practitioners who have a low or no mind's eye is that it's helpful to be really specific about sensations. Sensations don't require any visual image, right? We can recall sensations. We can actually go into our body and bring these sensations forth. And I think that's something that can be a really good tweak for somebody with a no or low mind's eye who finds themselves in a situation where they're being asked to visualize something. And I think that can be a really good technique, a good tweak basically for people who struggle with their mind's eye. Instead of stressing themselves out trying to see something, they can go into the body, they can go into the memory, and they can bring forth the sensations from the five senses. The technique that I very first asked somebody to do to test this was to imagine being on a plane. So I asked this very first client that I had that had aphantasia all those years ago, I said, are you familiar, like very familiar with plane travel? And they were like, yeah, I plane travel all the time. And I was like, well, it's a really specific sensation, right? You know, you're going from totally the plane is at standstill to having the plane rolling down the runway slowly to then having it roll faster and faster and faster. And you feel the pressure building up and building up and building up. And then you feel that lift off and it feels weird and your stomach kind of flips and suddenly there's a lightness and you're in the air. Can you imagine that right now bodily? And they were like, yeah, very, very well. You know, I just don't see the plane, but I know I'm on a plane in my physicality. So try that whenever you come across something and you're like, okay, well, that's me out because I can't visualize that. Try to go into your five senses in relation to what it would be like instead and try and hold that for as long as you can. Another useful thing to do is to deepen into the data. Okay, so one thing that I learned a long time ago about people with no mind's eye or, you know, patchy mind's eye is that they will not see anything visually, but they'll bring to mind the data and the detail that they have about the thing that they're being asked to visualize, right? So say that I ask somebody with aphantasia to visualize a forest, they're not going to see the forest, but they will bring to mind a forest and what it's all about, and the fact that there are animals there, and the fact that there are many species of tree, and basically they will bring to mind the data, and the data is what they settle on in their mind. What I would suggest is that you deepen into the data, bring more in. Think about stories, fairy tales, etc., different movies that you've seen that included forests. Think about any sayings or any cultural references that you have about forests. Think about songs that that include the word forest, or are about being in a forest. And extra points for anyone who's thinking of The Cure right now, bring in anything and everything. So go into the five senses for definite, actually smell the forest, smell the earth, smell the pine, smell the rain, hear the animals, go into your five senses, but also deepen into like the archetype of a forest. Think about what it means archetypally. Think about what it means to you emotionally. Go into it from a point of reference of deepening as much into the data around the thing that you're supposed to be visualizing as possible. Try not to stay at that first gateway where you're like, okay, forest, I can't visualize it, but I know what it is, so that's fine. Try and go deeper. Think about everything that you know and have ever fell into regarding a forest and its nature. And that can really make up a lot for the lack of mind's eye that is there. I am honestly absolutely convinced that this technique alone might ensure that somebody with aphantasia would have perhaps an even more heady and powerful response to a visualization than somebody with a really strong mind's eye. Because if you've got a really strong mind's eye, there is a danger that you're going to stop at the shallow end of the pool, right? Just thinking about the visual, only just visualizing very clearly a forest. Whereas somebody with a low or no mind's eye, if they go into deepening into the data and thinking about cultural references and songs and movies and, memories and like lines of poetry and everything else, they're probably going to have actually a deeper experience emotionally and intellectually than somebody who can really clearly imagine every leaf on every tree, but they're not really thinking deeper than that about the nature of the forest, about really what it means to be in a forest, So I'm actually convinced that when people with no mind's eye deepen into the data and collect more of it and gather it to them, they could potentially have a more meaningful or profound experience sometimes than someone who's really good at visualizing. I mean, think about it. I think it was Jung that said, the first stage of knowing an archetype is knowing it visually. That's the very shallow end of the pool. That is the very first stage. What's really important is knowing it emotionally, knowing where it fits inside your psyche. And so sometimes people with a very strong mind's eye might actually miss that trick. So, just saying. Here's another little experiment you can try if you struggle with your mind's eye. Try actually holding physically the object that you're being asked to visualize. So let's go back to the apple example, right? Try holding the apple, the invisible apple, in your hand. Put your other hand over the top. Roll your finger around the circumference of the apple and then go up to the stem and go in where the apple dips in and kind of rub your finger around there. And then hold the stem and twiddle the stem, so you're actually visualizing that there is that solid physical object there. Try and do this experiment if you know that you have a patchy mind's eye, or you tend to find yourself a little bit stunted when it comes to how else you can connect with what you're being asked to visualize or what you're trying to visualize on your own. Actually envision it. If you're being asked to visualize a blanket, or you're trying to visualize a blanket for a spell or something, pull the blanket up over you. Imagine the warmth of the blanket. I know it's not there in your mind, but stick with me, right? Like, grip it with your fingers, pull it over you, feel the weight of the blanket on you in your body, right? And then kind of like crunch it up a little bit, like squish it a little bit, maybe put it up over your shoulders, and then imagine your shoulders melting into the warmth of it. There doesn't have to be a blanket there for you to feel like there is a fucking blanket, So it's really actually utilizing your body to physically move things or hold things or squish things or stretch things. In place of having a mind's eye, that could be a really good way to empower your sense of visualization and to do really, really strong magic without being able to imagine things visibly. Another technique that you can try if you struggle with your mind's eye is to write or draw what it is that you really want to visualize. Okay, so if you want to visualize a few separate rooms that you want to do magic in your mind, obviously you will struggle with seeing it if you can see it at all, but draw a floor plan plan of the rooms, right? Draw where the doors connect the rooms. Write down descriptions of what goes on in these rooms that you want to do magic in. And instead of trying to visualize them, which might be frustrating for you, instead just move your finger around the drawing that you've made and announce out loud what is going on in the room each time you're in each part of it. Writing descriptions of the things that you want to put yourself into a visualization of can also be really powerful. Somebody with no mind's eye can write an absolutely delicious, banging description of something that they want to have happen. It's just that they won't necessarily have a picture perfect image of it in their head, but that doesn't matter. Writing is incredibly potent, an incredibly magical thing, and you can get really, really specific about those things that you can't see in mind, but you can bring them together on the page and then read them aloud and feel yourself again in your five senses and in your emotions transported to that place or that scenario, or that interaction with a being, whatever it might be. So writing and drawing can be really good. Plotting something out using words or sketching something out using drawing could be a really good way to lean into your techniques as a sorcerer that does struggle with mind's eye and with visualization. Don't be afraid to utilize the power of vision boards and Pinterest boards and things like that to bring together whatever it is that you want to visualize or do with your magic, or whatever energies you want to bring in that you worry that you're not seeing, but you want to be able to feel into them. Gather together collections of images. Now, if you want to try this, maybe you could gather some images together, right, on Pinterest or on paper or whatever, or print them off of the computer, gaze at them for a long time, and then close your eyes or look away and see if any of those images have burned into visual imagery. See if you can hold them for even a few seconds. Now, some people watching this that have pure aphantasia are going to be like, Kellyanne, fuck off. That sounds so frustrating and stressful. I can't see things in my head. I'm not going to try and do that, which is absolutely fair. But if you're watching this and you have more of like a patchy mind's eye, it might be a good idea to spend some time just gazing at an image or gazing at a small collection of images, and then looking away and seeing if anything can be recalled from that. Kind of like I said, burned in. It's like the image is burned in. And when you look away or close your eyes, you notice that there is some recall there. However you want to do it, I tend to find when I make boards, when I make vision boards and collages and Pinterest boards and things like that for magical work, I tend to find that it just gives me a really inspiring sense that I've pulled different energies and themes and archetypes together in a way that's moved me and made me feel differently and made me open to different possibilities. So it could just be that you want to stop there, and it's just more useful to have those visual references because you can't keep any in mind. But if you want to try for extra points, actually seeing if you can retain imagery after staring at it for a long time, then you can try that as well. It's all about finding different techniques and being open to different ways of either strengthening your mind's eye or accepting that your mind's eye is different. It's not there, or it's not strong. And so you want to find different ways to be the most potent practitioner that you can be on your terms. I did mention at the beginning of the video that some people are actually really good with recalling visuals if they are memories, right? So if they are things that happened to the individual, then that individual can actually visually recall them. If you are in this category, I want to stress to you that you could actually do quite a lot with memory visualization and memory magic. If you know that it's easier to recall things and keep things in mind that you've already experienced that are in your memory bank, think about how you can weave that into your witchcraft in various ways, right? Is there anything, for example, that you can pluck from memory that will help you to follow along with a guided visualization? Is there anything you can pluck from memory that you can use in your own customized visualizations for magic and ritual? So have a look at what your memory recall is like. You might be one of those people that just straight up can't see things. And so it's not going to matter if it was a memory. For others of you, though, you might not be aware of how much stronger your memory recall is visually. And so this might be actually quite an exciting time of breakthrough for you. And it can be more than just something that is like interesting. It can be something that gives you another doorway as a practitioner, that actually that if you visit different parts of your memory, you can really get stronger visualizations going on there because you're plucking from things that already exist in your synapses. you know. Another technique that I've suggested from time to time for practitioners with struggles with mind's eye is that they imagine themselves in their favorite graphic novel or movie, imagine themselves into the world from a book, or perhaps most potently and most effectively, imagine themselves into a video game. Video games are particularly potent for this because you have free will in the universe of the game. So there is a map of the world in the game. You revisit the same places over and over. You get a sense of where everything is in a game that you play often, but you have free will. You have the ability to move in different directions and do different things each time, which can make it into a really interesting, weird kind of shortcut for people that have mind's eye problems. So if you are into video games and you struggle with your mind's eye, please try this. Please try going and building an altar in the world of a video game in your head, okay? Please see how possible it is for you to imagine yourself, you know, driving around Night City in Cyberpunk or going and hunting deer in Red Dead Redemption. You might find that that is a weird, cheeky little random shortcut. I have asked a few people with difficulties with their mind's eye to do this, and they said they could actually do it. They were quite shocked with the results, and I'm convinced it's because it's like a movie, but there's also the option to do different things. But try it. Try imagining yourself into a graphic novel that you know all of the detail of, that you really can kind of like sense what all the characters are and where all the locations are. You have a lot of knowledge on the world. This is the main thing that I'm thinking, right? Is it's got to be something where you have a lot of knowledge on the world that you want to place yourself into and see what happens from that. You might find that it's interesting and your mind's eye is strengthened by the fact that you are transporting yourself into an environment that you know well, that you're kind of nerdy about, that you've spent a lot of time reading about or watching or, you know, playing, you know, being a part of, essentially. So think about pre-existing worlds that you are affectionate towards and passionate about, and think about how you can utilize those worlds and your knowledge of them to give you an experience that is interesting for somebody with difficulties with mind's eye. Sometimes I'll speak to somebody that doesn't have strong visual imaging, and they will say that the only thing that they see when they try to imagine things is blank space. It's just like a black emptiness. It's kind of like a void, you know. And even one time somebody asked me, you know, how can I astral travel if all I see is black space visually, right? But I would suggest that journeying into that void and seeing what can be experienced in that void would be very interesting and actually very meaningful. I think it's only the attitude that we take towards the necessity of being able to visualize things that makes us think that black space would be, you know, unfortunate in some way or not useful. For example, I wrote some notes here. I said that, you know, if you astral travel and it's just blank space, right, just black emptiness, you can still have really surreal journeys without seeing anything. You can feel auras, energies, and moods. You can tap into personalities of beings that you meet. You can take on new information. You can sense danger. You can sense when you've moved from one kind of location to another, right? You can sense a change in atmosphere. You can open yourself up to feelings, thoughts, shifts that you bring back with you into consensus reality. And you didn't need to see anything at any point in time. You were just floating in the blackness and the emptiness and the void, but you still had a really meaningful experience. I think it's much more about dropping the comparison between what happens for you as someone with no mind's eye and what happens for those witches that have a very strong mind's eye, right? If we drop that comparison and we work with what we have, I think really great things can happen. For those of you with aphantasia who are watching this video, you do not have to change, okay? Like I said at the beginning, it's the attitude around the necessity for visualization that I think needs to be questioned. It's not you, okay? And none of the techniques that I've posited in this video are intended to make you feel alienated or less than in your craft. They're just things that those with no mind's eye or low mind's eye might like to try, that I've kind of gathered together over time. A witch with aphantasia might have certain specific advantages. Like I said earlier about somebody with no mind's eye might be less likely to just stop at the visual. They might be able to go deeper deeper into the meaning of what it is that they're trying to visualize, because they're not distracted by the perfect imagery that they can see in their head, right? Another thing is that they might be less distracted by the visuals. They might actually be able to really go into the deep meaning of what they're trying to do with a spell or a ritual or whatever it is. I read one study that said that people with aphantasia often have scientific occupations, which I'm assuming means that they have, you know, from the little study that's been done, we can see that they have more of a scientific mindset. That can be very good actually for magic. It can be really good for record keeping and tweaking and changing things, and, you know, keeping a very strong handle on what is going on for you in your practice, and being very results oriented and very eager to see how things work. So that can be a really good quality for a practitioner.
And 1.74 H bar, okay? The uncertainty principle. It proves we can't ever really know what's going on.
To be honest, it probably can make you a much more grounded practitioner than somebody with lots of sort of hyper visual ability. And I think also that if you have no mind's eye, you might be less affected by the strong attacks of emotion that come along when things are visualized that weren't supposed to be visualized. Like, I think people with a very strong mind's eye don't always have control over what happens with their mind's eye. Sometimes things might jump out of the wardrobe, or, you know, things might go kind of haywire, and it might really set them off course. Whereas perhaps a practitioner with aphantasia has less sort of like inclination towards that, and can kind of like, you know, stay on course maybe. So there are definitely potential benefits for sorcerers with no mind's eye. I think it's really important that I say that for the record. These are just techniques that you might want to try. I'm in no way saying like, oh, try them and then you can be like us, you know, the people with a strong mind's eye, the better witches. I would never say that, okay? That's not what I'm trying to do here. I don't have aphantasia. I have probably the opposite thing, like hyperphantasia is what they call it, where I can see things really to such a vivid degree that it's like hyper reality, and I can see it with my eyes open. I can visualize, you know, very, very acutely with my eyes open, and sometimes it's to the point where I'm absolutely transported or distracted by the things that I'm seeing. That definitely has its downsides too, okay? But I wanted to say for the record that, like, I don't deal with struggles with mind's eye. I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody that really is interested in making witchcraft accessible and thinking outside the box in a way that I never did before I had an understanding of how people's minds work differently in this way. I took my hyperphantasia completely for granted because I was made to believe by the resources that I was ingesting that it was normative and that there was no need to question all of these visualization techniques that I was reading in many, many books over the years. So I had to come to this real point of like snapping out of that and realizing like not everybody's brain works the same way. So whatever is going on with your mind's eye, don't question your legitimacy. Don't think that you need to change. Please let me know if you have tried any of these techniques or any other techniques I haven't mentioned. What is your relationship with your mind's eye? Has this video made you feel a bit seen? If so, I'm so glad. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Check out some of my other stuff. You can go to the online store if you want to work with me one-on-one. I have a Patreon as well with loads of cool shit on it. I'm Kellyanne Maddox. You've been amazing. I've been here rambling, and now I'm going to go. Much love and blessed be. Mwah.